Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks everyone for coming, and thank you for having me here in Barcelona. I'm very happy to be a newcomer here. My interests in research are more or less thinking about decision-making under risk with applications to finance and environment and stuff like that. And this paper here that I would like to report a small section on is called Hedging Priors, where I think about the impact of ambiguity, the possible impact of ambiguity on trade in financial markets. So first of all, I need to define what I mean by ambiguity, and a way to do that is to first define risk. And when I talk about risk, it's a standard concept. I just think about a lottery with known probabilities and known payoffs. Right? And ambiguity is just something where some of those two is missing. So either some information about the odds or some information about the payoffs is missing. So this is a very weak concept of ambiguity that I have in mind, but for the purpose of the talk, I think it will be sufficient. Here, the standard definition for risk aversion: if for some average payoff, for the same average payoffs, you're confronted with two lotteries. One is to get something for sure, and the other one is a lottery, an actual lottery. Then you prefer the sure payoff, sorry. And in a similar fashion, we can define ambiguity aversion as for the same average probabilities that you're confronted with, you prefer to know everything about the probability model. Right? And the paper that I'm reporting about here is broadly investigating into the following field. Suppose that there is a group of ambiguity-averse individuals, and they're confronted with ambiguity. What are they able to do? Are they able to write insurance contracts? Are they able to engage in some sort of risk sharing? Are they able to reduce the social or individual costs of being exposed to this ambiguity? Right. So I'd like to spend a few slides in motivating why this might be important, and then I will introduce a very basic, a very simple economy to illustrate what I found an intriguing result, and I hope you will be able to follow because it's really simple. And then I would like to argue that what may seem a bit exotic over the next few slides actually has some connections to the real world and might actually happen out there in the financial markets. All right, so why is ambiguity interesting beyond conceptual interest? Well, apparently people exhibit ambiguity aversion. When I look at experimental results, then typically like between 80–90% of all the studies show that actually individuals, at least in the laboratory, exhibit ambiguity aversion. So this is around 20–80% on average have non-neutral attitudes to ambiguity, and this is different from zero, which is important enough to play a role on financial markets. And I already put the financial markets up there. I think it is not very difficult to argue that financial markets exhibit ambiguity. It's very difficult to quantify all the risk that every agent is exposed to on financial markets, given the interconnections between all the assets and all the securities and derivatives and the fundamental risks of the economy. It's very difficult even for experts to quantify all the risks that are out there. And to prove my point, I put a quote here from Olivier Blanchard at the height of the crisis. He said, when as today the unknown unknowns, as a synonym for ambiguity, dominate and the economic environment is so complex as to appear nearly incomprehensible, the result is extreme prudence, a behavioral effect among investors. So what are policymakers to do? First and foremost, reduce uncertainty. And second, undo the effects of uncertainty on the portfolio side and help recycle the funds towards risky assets. So he addresses an issue of an apparent flight to safety that is happening on financial markets. And he ranks it among the top priorities of policymakers in face of the crisis to actually reduce uncertainty. And I also have a quote here from the policy side, which is actually, well, first I showed you a quote from the research side directed towards policymakers, and here the policymakers are addressing researchers. 3 weeks ago, Ben Bernanke gave a speech at Princeton where he talked about how the economics profession fared, or how the models we use fared in the financial crisis, to explain the financial crisis. And one of the open questions that he is pointing out is actually behavior under uncertainty. So he said, the unknown unknowns during the crisis resulted in panicky selling by investors and significant increases in households' precautionary savings, so more or less what Olivier Blanchard said. And research in this area could aid our understanding of crisis and other extreme situations. So he ranks it as the first priority, in his view, to understand crisis better, to think about ambiguity. So with this backup, I would like to proceed and show you what I have to say to this on this subject. It will be a very small issue maybe, but I think it's intriguing and might be important. So here I summarize again what they were saying, that basically ambiguity has real behavioral effects on financial markets, and that apparently there are welfare costs, that's what we have in mind at least, of ambiguity on financial markets, and that we should try to reduce those costs. Right, so what have others done in this area? I would like to report very briefly the very recent literature, about the very recent literature on decision-making and uncertainty applied to financial markets. So there is a lot of, well, there is a big boom on ambiguity on financial markets when it comes to asset pricing. So these models are very popular. I just named a few here: Epstein and Snyder, Hansen and Sargent, Chu and Miao. So these models apply different decision maker models. So either it's the robust control theory, or it's max-min models, or it's this KMM model that I'm going to use. I won't talk much about models of decision making under ambiguity. I hope that my talk will encompass all of them. Then there is a paper by Christian Gaulier who addresses the issue of would people actually like to rebalance their portfolios towards safer assets, and he shows that under rather weak conditions this is true. And we also have a paper together where we show that people would like to save more in the face of ambiguity, over time, that is. But the problem with these models is that they don't actually address trade, right? So these are representative agent models where by definition there's no trade. There's a no trade condition as an equilibrium condition, so it doesn't help us to understand how trade on financial markets was affected by ambiguity, because there is none. So what we have to do is to actually look at general equilibrium models where there are more than one agent, there are two or more or n agents under uncertainty. And there, unfortunately, we know much less. So we know that in a very special case where there is no risk on aggregate, so where GDP is flat and known ex ante, there we can characterize what is an efficient allocation, namely the standard expected utility benchmark of full insurance. So this applies even when there is ambiguity aversion. But if we allow for macro risk, which is actually, I think, the more interesting framework, when actually there is risk on GDP growth is not certain, financial markets are uncertain, then very little is known. So the difficulty of the non-linearity of these preferences and beliefs actually makes it very difficult to find closed-form solutions and to make analysis. Even when in simulations, it's very difficult to get to results. So the questions that I would like to raise is, it's a very narrow one, which is, which securities would agents actually like to trade under ambiguity? So given that up to now there is not much hope that we can characterize what is actually an efficient allocation, can we at least say what agents prefer to trade under ambiguity, right? So is it really that they would always like to save more, or do they maybe demand more exotic securities? And a second question, can we say which properties of an allocation make it more efficient than another property? Okay. And I will use actually a general equilibrium model under ambiguity so that there will be trade. And I will show that there will be demand for securities which are sort of exotic. So they have properties which wouldn't be desirable under expected utility. And then in the same paper, I look at an efficient risk-sharing model under ambiguity, which is just a reinterpretation of some parameters and multipliers. And I'm able, under some conditions, to actually characterize what the Pareto optimum should look like in such an economy. To summarize what is in the paper, the way I showed how agents could improve welfare with respect to, say, the complete markets benchmark that is inspired by expected utility theory, where we know that without loss of generality, complete markets lead us to the efficient frontier. I showed that if they make second-order bets and if they're ambiguity averse, then they could improve welfare. Right? And if there are enough such assets, I showed that in the paper that we can reach a Pareto frontier that I'm actually able to characterize. So I can give you properties of what consumption for each agent, what the consumption function should look like, how much he or she should be exposed to risk, and so on. And in particular, I find that an ambiguity-neutral agent, which maybe could be the state, it's not necessarily true that this state, like Blanchard suggested, should bear all ambiguity in the economy, unless she is also risk neutral. So if we believe that the state should be risk neutral, then indeed the state should bear all ambiguity. But since bearing ambiguity also in my model involves bearing risk, because my consumption varies over a probability model, then the agent, the state, should not do that unless she is also risk neutral. So this is all I had to say. Thank you very much.